Good morning and welcome to Travels with Monkey Boy. Taking you back 1994, and we're day three of our trip to Tanzania. Being a sports fan is stupid. You devote so much emotional energy to your team, but it's kind of random who your team is, and you certainly have no control of how they perform. You could also be a casual fan, but that's not for me. If I adopt something, I am a fanatic. My team was a heritage. I was born in Green Bay, so I basically had to be a Green Bay Packers fan. Not only that, but I was born in 1961, and the Packers were NFL champions in 62, 65, 66, 67. So, pretty much before I had consciousness, my team was one of the greatest teams ever. It's all anyone talked about. It was a big national story for our little town of Green Bay. I think by 1970, when I was 9, I really understood what it meant to be to follow a team and would never miss a game and bled when they lost. Then from 1970 to 1992, Green Bay was the worst team in the country. Sports Illustrated even recommended the city sell the team because there was no future hope. Then I moved out of the country, and my first year gone, they won the Super Bowl. It was actually great fun watching the game under the stars. Game started at 1 a.m. on a projected screen by the pool at the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, drinking real alcohol with about 150 other expats. But that was last year. This year, not only did the Packers make it to the Super Bowl, but I won tickets to the game. As a season ticket holder of the teams in the game, your name goes into a lottery to get tickets. And my name came up. Never won anything in my life. Won two tickets to the Super Bowl, two tickets on the 50-yard line for the game in San Diego, and a once in a lifetime chance. And I had already booked and paid for this family safari in Tanzania. Stupid randomness of life. The good news is my dad got to go. The bad news is he took my scumbag ex-brother-in-law to the game, who was cheating on my sister at the time and divorced her later that year with two babies under 4 and never paid child support. Sorry, I vent. Pat White might be the worst human I've ever met. Anyway, this preamble is because this morning was the game. Of course, I had a plan. Sports are only good live. The excitement, anticipation, randomness all disappears the moment you know the score. But what if you create a scenario where you don't know the score or any aspect of the game until a later point? My plan was that back in Jeddah, I had two different devices recording the game. All I had to do was avoid hearing the score, and how hard would that be? We were staying in a hotel inside a crater in Africa that had no electricity until the game was nearly over. Once the game is over, I just had to avoid newspapers for a day. This nonsense that the Super Bowl is some international event that billions watch is just a bunch of hooey. It may be televised in 150 countries, but largely that's for the American expats. For a day or two, newspaper headlines from foreign papers might mention it, but as long as I had avoided the International Herald Tribune or the USA Today, basically the two international newspapers, the US papers, I would be able to go back to Jeddah in a week and watch the game as if it were new. A simple, nearly infallible plan. Then the madness sets in. Day three, I woke up at 5 a.m. The Super Bowl was calling me. Though there were no TVs in the room, the lodge did have a TV room and a huge satellite dish on the roof. So, knowing that electricity was restored, I quietly dressed and walked to the main lodge building. As I walked along the path to the central lodge, I paused for a few minutes by the pool and looked into the great crater below me. It's kind of like being in the rim of the Grand Canyon at night. You sense that there's a big hole there, but you can't make out anything but the darkness. It's also a bit disconcerting to know that within 200 yards of where I was standing, there was likely some kind of animal that could kill me. There was also nothing to stop said animal from just walking up to the pool to eat me. No animal walls here. I didn't linger long, though. It was cold, sweatshirt cold, and I was clad in t-shirt and shorts. So I went into the lodge, into the front desk, and asked how I could get into the TV room. Sorry, sir, our TV is in Arusha being fixed. In retrospect, that was the answer I needed to hear. I'm in one of the world's most unique spots, and for me to devote any effort or have any mental distraction over something as stupid as football was silly. And besides, infallible plan to take it in later, right? I went back down and sat by the pool and watched the dawn slowly rise over the crater. Breakfast at 7:30, packed and on the road by 8. Those were our orders. We had a big day today. We spent the better part of the next 2 hours circling the top of the crater. We had to go from one side of the crater to the other and then descend down the side to the long flat plain of the Serengeti. By about 10 a.m., we were approaching a Maasai village that we were going to visit. The Maasai are herdsmen, so approaching the village from above, we were still descending from the top of the crater. You see large herds of cattle within close range of a circular village, with an outer wall made of cow dung and adorned with thorn bushes to keep the lions from eating them. We were on the outskirts of the Serengeti Plain in a primitive village as far from modernity as possible. As we pulled up, there was another small carload of tourists just leaving the village, and as I stepped out of our truck, one woman loudly said to the other, "Well, I'm really happy for John Elway," the quarterback for the team that was playing the Packers. That's it. Never heard another word of the game. My plan was flawless, except for this random moment. And for the rest of the trip, I was tortured by that statement. Stupid woman, stupid Americans, stupid luck, stupid Packers. Entering the village, Paul and Edward greeted the chief, who was wearing a baseball cap and looked for all the world like the town drunk. And they paid him for the privilege of our visit, $50 a car. This is the deal Tanzania has with the Maasai. Rather than give them social benefits, they let them sell themselves as tourist attractions. Still, they're much like the Amish in that this isn't a game for them. They live this way. They choose to live this way. And the village, I'm guessing there were something like 25 houses in the village. To call something that was made from cow dung a house, though, seems a bit strong. This was National Geographic poverty. There was a mother there with her maybe 2-year-old child. The baby had the distended belly of malnutrition and maybe 50 flies on his face. We got to watch as the flies crawled up his nose, into his mouth, and across his eyes without him flinching. The mother had flies all over her as well, but at least she made an effort to swat them away. After the chief had his money, he escorted us to a big circular area, animal pen, where the women got in one line and the men in another and did some traditional songs. The men hopped up and down. I guess they're famous for this jumping. To me, it's pretty much looked like a bunch of guys hopping up and down. Not really spectacular, hardly something to be famous for. Well, this may seem like about half a thought. I had an excuse. The flies were everywhere. What are these people thinking, making their houses out of cow poop? Paul kept telling us to stay put because they would be insulted if we left. I did stay for most of the show, 15 minutes maybe. But how do you tell 6-year-old Frankie to stay still with her face being covered by flies in a village that stank, with the sun pounding down on her, watching a bunch of people with horribly mutilated ears jumping up and down? Also, the guy you just paid $50 won't be insulted. The answer is you don't. So after about 5 minutes, it was just me and Joe watching these idiots jump up and down, smiling to show our appreciation and trying not to puke. After the jumping up and down came the sell junky trinkets to the Americans part of the festivities. This involved us going into another circular area within the village that was filled with the elaborate, junky, beadwork handicraft of the Maasai. This shopping circle, maybe 15 feet in diameter, was fenced in with 6-foot poles spaced every 3 inches. Tables with the goods stacked on them were next to the fence arranged along in a circle. Shoppers, only us, entered the market through a door in the fence. The chief and the head salesman came into the circle and haggled over the goods. It was kind of interesting because apparently each table in the circle had trinkets made by a different family. There would be five Maasai war clubs, all looking identical, a stick with beads wrapped around it, and no obvious price. Little Alex picked up a stick that he was transfixed by and said to the sales guy, "How much? $20?" And as I was fainting, the price became firm, and we soon owned a perfectly priced stick. Of course, the kids all wanted something, so we fought through the smell and tried to haggle with the salesman. We ended up spending a couple of $100 more on the most ridiculous pile of junk you could imagine. The curious thing was, as we were inside this small fenced-in market, if you look past the tables and past the fence, you notice that the entire village was watching us. They all circled the fence from the outside and they had their faces pressed against the poles, watching. A pretty zoo-like feeling. I left the shopping circle quickly, partly because I didn't want to buy any of the junk, partly because of the smell, but also because I just can't get enough of seeing really poor people. So I wandered the village. The houses all seemed to be about the same size. There were no doors, but the entranceway required a kind of zigzag, so you couldn't see directly into the houses. This was probably better. I did walk into one house and it was completely black. No lights, no candles, and only about a 5-inch square window high up on one of the walls. After a minute or two, your eyes adjusted enough to see the sleeping quarters and sitting area with fire pit, about the size of a closet. Dirt floor, poop walls. This was the chief's house. So the chief lived in squalor. I guess the other people in the village aspired to squalor. Another interesting thing about the Maasai is that they didn't have the same kind of sexual hang-ups us Americans have. Apparently, a man would marry, the chief had something like 6 wives and 23 children, but any man could use any woman of the village for his comfort, which goes to explain why Hillary visited Tanzania without Bill last year. Note, very funny joke in 1994. Today it would be, who's Hillary and Bill? Anyway, it's this kind of sexual freedom that has liberated the Africans. Uganda, Zambia, Botswana all have something like 35% of their adults between 25 and 40 infected with HIV. Kenya, Tanzania, and a bunch of other countries aren't far behind. Maybe there are benefits to being puritanical. We spent another half an hour walking around the village. It really wasn't so big, maybe 50 yards across. They did have a school. You could tell it was a school because it said school on it. Also, they had a blackboard up with some English letters on it. There were no children in this school until we showed up, and then the school filled up, and they sang songs for us until we gave them money. On one hand, you watch what life is like here, and you pity everyone there. The stench, the flies, the poverty, the ignorance. But I think in a broader view, it's a window into our past. What we watch could not have been far removed from the way the Maasai lived 30,000 years ago. When you look at their lives, you get a better appreciation of man's evolution. These people are not the dominant species on the planet. These people are not even the dominant species in their neighborhood. They put thorn branches all over the exterior walls of their village to keep animals from coming in and eating them. They have 23 children because they know, or at least until Budinsky UN relief agencies came in, that 18 of them would die of some weird disease or being eaten. The Maasai are just another animal on the veldt scratching out a life. To think that in the space of a few thousand years, we've managed to go from living in houses made of poop to going to the moon, it's impressive. And I guess we owe a debt to the Maasai for the living museum. This Maasai trip was the perfect accent to our next stop. Maybe 30 minutes up the road, we stopped at Olduvai Gorge. Olduvai is the area where the Leakeys did their work on the earliest hominid, though I was surprised to hear that it wasn't Lucy, or at least not here. Lucy was discovered in Ethiopia. The gorge itself was kind of a boring little canyon carved out by a river, the work of the river along with some shifting of the layers of rock exposed something like 3 million years of hominid history. There was a rundown little museum there. There was a picnic area overlooking the gorge, and that was about it. Without the historical significance, it would have been a stupid place to stop. They wouldn't let you hike into the gorge. They wouldn't show you the digs. There was only plaster casts of the things they dug up. Still, I thought it was cool. I even peed into the gorge. It gave me a sense of connection with the Australopithecus africanus. We ate lunch and then moved on. About half an hour outside of Olduvai, the hills gave way to a long flat plain. This wasn't the Serengeti yet, but the distinction was meaningless. Ngorongoro used to be part of the Serengeti and was broken up about 20 years ago. Ngorongoro is a conservation area, and Serengeti is a nature preserve. The difference is that the Maasai are allowed to live in the Ngorongoro area, but only animals are in the Serengeti. Anyway, this plain was inside Ngorongoro, but was all part of the same great flat plain. The significance of this area, though, was that the great herds were migrating, moving from the Serengeti to the crater for the crater's coolness and guaranteed water supply. As we drove towards the Serengeti, we all of a sudden found ourselves in this great sea of animals. On both sides of the road, spreading as far as the eye can see across this flat plain, were wildebeests. There had to be hundreds of thousands of them. Since we were kind of in no man's land here, Paul and Edward took us off-road. We just went driving across the plain, watching the animals, feeding and fighting, and watching for lions. And not just wildebeest, there were thousands of zebra, thousands of gazelle, animals everywhere. We probably drove for half an hour through this great migration. Then we're stunned to hear Paul tell us this wasn't the great migration. This was just a migration. When they make their famed run across the Serengeti, there are something like 1.5 million wildebeest. Paul said that for several weeks, the same quantity of wildebeest and zebras would leak out of the Serengeti and towards the crater. Soon, though, the animals began tapering off, and maybe 10 minutes later, we passed through a small wooden gate that said something like, "Welcome to the Serengeti." Driving up a little hill to the registration center, we noticed the trees were filled with these great storks, 3 feet tall at least, with like an 8-foot wingspan, and there must have been 20 of them in each tree. Everything in Africa is big. By this point of the day, we were all pretty tired and sick of seeing animals, or more accurately, sick of bouncing up and down in the rovers and being covered in dust. We mentioned that we wanted to head to the hotel as soon as possible, but were informed that it was at least another 2 hours. The Serengeti was a bit disappointing because there were no animals. Paul said that one of the drawbacks of the rain we've had is that everything was so green that the animals could spread themselves out as far as they wanted and find food. The Serengeti is roughly twice as large as Yosemite. The crater area is only slightly smaller, so we're talking about a large area. We did have some fun along the way. At one point, we spotted a cheetah and drove off-road to chase it. But our driver, Edward, quickly grew bored of that and drove on. The other car stayed and played with the cheetah for a while, and then found a Servile cat to chase as well. At one point, we came across a couple of giraffes crossing the road. We stopped counting, and that day I think we saw 20 giraffes. You know, it's really an impressive animal. I think I may have been my favorite from the trip. So stately, so tall. And at one point, it came close enough to our truck, we could have touched it. I haven't mentioned much about the look of the Serengeti. Paul said that he liked the Serengeti best. The animals are the same everywhere, but the Serengeti is the most beautiful geographically. As I've said before, it's basically a huge flat plain, but all spread across the horizon are these little rock groupings. If you've seen Lion King, they're what Pride Rock is. They are called kopjes, pronounced pretty close to copy. But they are like small hills made out of boulders. And the really cool thing is that they are the leftover bits from Ngorongoro Mountain, purportedly larger than Kilimanjaro, when it blew its top and became Ngorongoro Crater. They really are picturesque, and lions do hang out at them. As we went to the lodge, we circled around dozens of these rock piles, looking for sleeping lions. Of course, we found no lions in the beautiful setting, though we did see a lot of pretty little turquoise and purple lizards. We eventually did find three female lions, but they were sleeping in a big dirt pile. So much for my award-winning picture. We watched them for a while until they got up and began moving around. I don't know. I'm just not a big lion guy. I find it fascinating that they eat everything. Every animal I saw, I asked Paul what ate them. The answer to everything was lion. I mean, warthogs, zebras, buffalo, wildebeest, porcupines, baby elephants. Paul told us he's seen them kill an adult giraffe. They kill them by jumping in their the neck, and then holding on. In theory, they're an impressive animal, but standing there, they're nowhere near as frightening as a grizzly bear or a shark. Just a big damn cat. Even a tiger looks terrifying and beautiful. But a lion is a boring color, not that powerful looking, and tends to lay around a lot. Okay, if you get to see them kill something, that may be different. And when you see them moving quietly through the tall grass, it can be a little bit unnerving. But as a general rule, I'd much rather see a cheetah. To give you an idea how casual we felt around them, we even watched them from our truck with the top open and us hanging out. There was nothing to stop the lion from jumping right into our car, except that Edward told us they didn't do that sort of thing. After the lions, it was straight to the lodge. It was probably 4 p.m. by the time we got there. After dusty, hot, the Serengeti is much lower altitude than in Ngorongoro, so hotter. Still, for being only a few hundred miles from the equator, and this being their summer season, it wasn't that hot, maybe 80. And jarring day, we were all happy to hop in the swimming pool. The water was too cold to stay in for long, but it was a beautiful pool, and it was nice to sit out in the deck chairs around the pool and just drink in Africa. Our hotel was situated on the top of the only hill for miles around. The hill was wooded with these lovely acacia trees you see in every picture of Africa. You know, the ones with the flat green tops. Within 100 yards of our hotel, we had passed through a troop of baboons. Looking out through the trees in the distance, you could occasionally see different antelope walking around. Again, it's strange how in nature you are. There's no gate that separates us from the animals, no wall, no fence. If a lion was bold enough to stalk us, he could easily grab one of the kids playing by the pool. About 6, the families got together and we had a giant Pictionary game. As usual, the men were dominating. We had half a board lead when the beer and gin kicked in. As we watched our lead evaporate, we decided it was getting late and we better get the kids into dinner. Again, another unbelievable meal, but at this point, we were fed up with it. The one thing you don't think about is that a safari in Africa is a very sedentary thing. They won't let you get out of the car. I don't think any of us walked more than 10 steps in 3 days. Then they fed you like kings. We all needed a good 2 mile run, but that was impossible. We ate half a dinner and then off to bed, probably asleep by 10. And that's the story from today. Let me share with you quickly the map. Okay, remember, started in Jeddah, flew to Kenya, then we drove to Arusha, then Arusha to Ngorongoro Crater, and then way up here is the entrance to the Serengeti National Park. Many of you have heard of the Maasai Mara, which is the Kenyan. So the border between Kenya and Tanzania is right here. Maasai Mara is on the Kenyan side. And as I said, we were on this side of the crater to sleep. We had to cross around to this side, get on the road, stopped in a Maasai village, maybe around here, and then spent the night in some long lost hotel in the Serengeti. But again, the hotels were quite impressive. And let me share with you a couple of pictures. So this was the hotel that we stayed at that night. That's the cold swimming pool that we stayed in. And again, the Serengeti, we're right there. There's just you step out and walk there. Um, Beautiful zebras by the mountain, hippo in the water. That's the mountain in the background. Buffalo, warthogs, the vultures up in the trees, zebra, giraffes. Here's what I was talking about, the great sea of animals. It's just incredible. The number, the quantities, the variety. And that's us driving around. There's our truck in the middle of a great field of wildebeest. It's a sausage tree. I don't know why I took a picture of that, but I like the sausages. Giraffe running. There's the monkeys in the tree. There's the lizard that I talked about that was up on the rock. The Mystic Mountain in the background. That would be the crater going back the other way. Monkey in the dirt. There's the Maasai village. There's their herd of, if you see in the background, their herd of animals. There they are dressed in their red gowns. Here they are all lined up ready to dance for us. There's one of the little kids. There's Mr. Giraffe right in our car. Antelopes everywhere. Even the hawks, you don't even notice them, but that's, I mean, if we drove by that in Wisconsin, it would be an amazing nature interaction in here. It says, ah, there's some birds in a tree. There's Mr. Cheetah out stalking something in the Serengeti. Cheetahs are fairly small cats, actually, but they're super fast. There's a bustard, not to be mistaken for a bastard. See him in the foreground. There's Alex in the village drinking an orange juice. I think they gave it to us. There they are frustrated with the smell. There's Alex with his stick. Me outside couldn't stand up inside those villages. There's Seth and Frankie. And that's it. That's all I got for today. Thanks for coming along. More again tomorrow.